Let's play Massive Darkness, Risk and Token variant. This is a variation of Massive Darkness that uses Risk-style combat, skill tokens, and is designed to be played in about an hour or a little more. Risk-style combat helps balance out the combat and give it a more simultaneous feel. Skill and weapon upgrade tokens make the game less fiddly. First, in the rulebook, find the quest you're interested in playing, but modify it so that you only use 3 tiles. Each tile will represent a different level, so the first tile will be either level 1, 2, or 3. The level you choose is up to you. Place the tiles and door tokens in a manner suitable for the adventure. Next, place the level tokens as appropriate. Now shuffle the weapon upgrade tokens and place them throughout the dungeon in any manner that you'd like. Typically you want to place them within locked rooms. However, you may decide to put some tokens out in the middle of the open dungeon. To understand more about weapon upgrade tokens, see the weapon upgrade token video. Place the damage and skill upgrade tokens as well as the Anytime XP reminder out where it can be easily accessed. To understand more about skill upgrade tokens and damage tokens, see the video on skill and damage tokens. Now place the enemies so you have lots of eye candy. For each room in the dungeon, draw a guard card appropriate for the level of that tile. Don't forget to draw a treasure card as well. Place the enemy cards near the room where the enemy will be located. There will be 1 enemy per room. This is different than the typical Massive Darkness. Now place enemies in the room appropriate for the number of heroes that are playing. The enemies will not be activated until you enter the room, so if there aren't enough enemies to populate all the rooms, start with the lower levels first. This is true especially for bosses. Notice that this setup is different than the typical Massive Darkness setup using door cards. We will use door cards, but only to see if there's an ambush. This variation of Massive Darkness does not use the concept of an armory. Skill upgrades and Anytime XP can be used anytime the hero has gained enough experience points. Weapon upgrades occur anytime a weapon upgrade token is picked up or an enemy is defeated and a weapon card is picked up. Next, for each player, choose a hero card and select 2 hands worth of weapons. That means that you can select either 2 one-handed weapons or 1 two-handed weapon. Also select armor. Do not use the starting equipment as in the typical Massive Darkness. Instead, choose a level of the weapons equal to the first level in your dungeon. So if the first level of your dungeon is level 1, then you will equip level 1 weapons and armor. If your first level is level 3, then you will equip level 3 weapons and armor. Just like normal Massive Darkness, you start with a health of 5 and 0 experience points. Since part of the design intention is to better balance the battles, you do not use the Lightbringer card, unless you want to. Finally, replace the remaining tokens as described by the adventure, the exit and start tokens, as well as your heroes onto the board. Decide who will be first player, and it's time to get started. In this game variant, we make adjustments based upon the current level. Let's take a look at those. Level adjustments. Level adjustments allow you to alter the difficulty based upon the level of gameplay. For level 1, enemies don't use carried weapons when attacking and defending. They still carry them, so the hero gets them when the enemy is defeated. Each enemy does 1 damage for each successful attack. No roaming monsters or agents are spawned by events, and there's a maximum of 1 guard spawned by an event at a time. At level 2, enemies can use the carried card if it matches their ability. They still do a damage of 1, but if you want a more challenging level, they can do a damage of 2. At level 2, you can spawn roaming monsters, guards, or agents, but you're limited to 1. At level 3 and higher, all events are allowed, and the enemies do a damage of 2. Okay, let's play. This variant is designed to have a little bit more simultaneous feel in the gameplay, so it follows the same phases as described on the back of the Massive Darkness rulebook, but we make some slight tweaks. First, each hero's phase only has 2 actions rather than 3, and movement counts as an action. Basically, everything costs 1 action. There is no transmuting. And there is no enemy counterattack because that's handled with the Risk-style combat. One other thing to be aware for the hero phase is to draw a door card whenever you open a door to check to see whether it's an ambush. If it's not an ambush, discard the card, but if it is an ambush, move the enemies to the active hero zone and they get to take an action. The enemy phase is the same as regular Massive Darkness. Okay, let's do a little illustration of the player phase. Okay, in this illustration, Bjorn will go first and he'll open the door as his first action. He draws a door card and it's not an ambush, so he's able to take a second action. So he moves into the room. Sybil goes next, and so on her first action she moves into the room, and for her second action she attacks the enemy. Okay, now it's your turn. For the sake of walking through this video, just repeat the player phase until you're able to engage the enemy in combat. Don't pick up any treasure tokens, we'll go over that later. Okay, pause the video, move your players, and when you're ready to engage in combat, start it up again and we'll walk through the combat section. Okay, let's talk about combat, including range differences and group splitting. Risk-style combat. Risk-style combat is a simultaneous type of combat. You match attacker and defender dice based upon the success of each die, even if the attacker and defender have a different number of dice. In this particular role, we would match the 3 swords and a diamond against the single blue shield. Then we would match the 2 swords and a BAM against the empty green square. The extra attack dice are ignored. 3 swords is greater than 1 shield, so the attacker would do damage for that attack. 2 swords is greater than no shields, and so the attacker again would do damage based upon that attack. In a different role, such as this one, both attackers and defenders might do damage. In this case, we would align the 2 red swords with the 2 green shields. We would then align either the red or the yellow sword against 2 more green shields, and the yellow sword against no blue shields. The remaining attack dice is ignored. The effect of BAMs and diamonds are determined by the skills of each of the characters. Unlike Risk, the attacker does not determine whether they'll use some or all of their attacking dice. Ignoring the effect of BAMs in this case, 2 swords is equal to 2 shields, so in this case, both attacker and defender do damage. In the second attack, 1 sword is less than 2 shields, so the defender is the one that does damage. In the third case, 1 sword is greater than no shields, so the attacker does damage. The amount of damage done is determined by another mechanism such as damage tokens. In the situation where the guard has no defense, such as Orc Flayers, all of the attack die count. However, the guard is able to counterattack even if all of the guards are killed. Dealing with range differences in Risk-style combat. In order to understand how to deal with range differences, first we have to define 2 terms, mid-range and out of range. In order to attack, a combatant must be in range. Mid-range is when a defender is currently out of range, but they can move into range by moving 1 space. This also applies for combatants that have only ranged weapons and they're in the same zone as combatants that have a melee weapon. This means that unlike regular Massive Darkness, characters can move out of the zone of combat. A defender is out of range if they must move more than 1 space in order to be in range for attack. The defender being out of range really only happens to melee defenders. When the defender is out of range, a tie goes to the attacker. If the defense die is greater, then the attack fails, but no damage is done to the attacker for that pair. If the defender is a hero, they may move up to 2 spaces as the last step of that action. If the defender is a guard or enemy, they move 2 spaces toward the closest hero as the last step of the action. Of course, that's only if the enemies have survived the attack. Now let's talk about what happens if the defender is in mid-range. If the defender is an enemy, they engage. They move 1 space toward the attacker, and then ties go to the attacker. But if the defense die is greater, the defenders do damage to the attacker. If the defender is a hero, they can choose to either run away or engage, but they must determine that before the dice are rolled. In either case, a tie goes to the attacker. If the defender decides to run away and the defense die is greater, the attack fails, but no damage is done to the attacker for that pair. The hero moves up to 2 spaces away from the attack. If the hero decided to stay engaged, the hero moves 1 space toward the attackers, and any defense die that is greater than the attack die will do damage to the attackers. Groups are allowed to split if possible. Each subgroup attacks as a separate enemy. Damage done to a subgroup overflows from one member to the other. In other words, if one member is destroyed and there's extra damage, it flows to the other member of the subgroup. However, you follow the same standard rules as in Massive Darkness, that if a minion is killed, the excess damage does not apply to the boss in that same attack. If one subgroup is destroyed, excess damage does not flow over to the other subgroup. Minions do try to stay in the same zone as their boss to protect the boss, but they will split from their boss if there is another attacker in a different zone. Zap and headbutt. Since these are not considered attacks, they don't have counterattacks, so you may want to only wound if a BAM appears, and not allow the use of shadow mode to add a BAM. As you defeat the enemy, upgrade your experience points as in normal Massive Darkness. When the last enemy is defeated, the weapon is dropped in the location of that enemy. Contrary to typical Massive Darkness, the player who killed that enemy does not automatically pick up that weapon. Note that picking up any item, including weapons that were carried by enemies, costs 1 action. It doesn't cost an action to drop a weapon or to rearrange your weapons when you've just picked up a treasure token or exchanged a weapon. If that weapon is of no value to any other player, you can discard that weapon. It's not any value in transmuting. Just consider it a useless weapon in the dungeon. If the weapon is of value, it can be used to replace the old weapons for any player. Those old weapons can be picked up by other players or discarded from the game. Now it's your turn to fight the enemy. Don't forget that if you're at level 1, the enemies don't use the weapon that they're carrying. Pause the video and return to it after you've defeated your enemy, picked up your weapon, and you're ready to pick up a treasure token. Now you're ready for your heroes to pick up treasure tokens. Remember that each treasure token costs 1 action to pick up. When a player turns over a weapon upgrade token, they can either leave it there or use it to upgrade one of their weapons. If the token represents a potion, the player can keep it and use it later. This token means that the player can upgrade their weapon to the current level +1 for a 2-handed weapon. There are also shield, armor, and potion tokens. To upgrade their weapon, the player specifies the type of weapon that matches their abilities, whether that be melee, ranged, or magic. They then draw from the top of the treasure deck matching the appropriate level until they find a weapon that matches the handedness and the weapon type that they're looking for. This is just a mechanic that allows us to make sure that we get a weapon that matches their abilities. Thematically, what we expect is really happening is that they have found a weapon matching their abilities within the dungeon. Players can use whatever weapons and armor that they like, but it must match the general limits of Massive Darkness. If a player upgrades their weapon, they must discard the old weapon. If the old weapon is possibly of use to another player, it can be left on the tile where the current player is. If you're sure that the old weapon is not of use to any other players, simply discard it from the game. The remaining phases are the same as regular Massive Darkness, with a couple of minor exceptions. Skill and damage upgrades via the tokens can only be purchased during the experience phase, similar to normal Massive Darkness. But the Anytime XP can be used anytime the player has sufficient experience points. For the 1 hour version of the game, the frequency of the event can be modified by using a 10-sided die. Only draw an event card if you roll the die and its value is greater than 5. You can modify that according to your own preferences. Okay, now you're ready to finish the game, but there are some final things that you may want to be aware of. Because heroes use the skill tokens, for the heroes you ignore the text on the armor and the weapons. However, enemies use those text values when they are carrying the weapons. They also use the text on the bottom of their card. You also honor the text on the artifacts and on the shadow mode skills and the special skills of heroes. Finally, the game is for you to have fun, so tweak it however is appropriate for you. If you need to adjust the difficulty, the easiest way to do that is to either change the amount of experience that players gain when defeating enemies, or change the number of weapon upgrade tokens, or the skill and damage tokens. You can also increase or decrease the cost of any of the tokens. You can even do that per level. In any case, enjoy the game and have fun.